President Trump proposes a U.S. takeover of Gaza and relocation of Palestinians. Is he serious? And would this bring peace to the region? Foreign policy expert Dr. Walid Phares explains. And there's a trade war brewing between the U.S. and China as the Trump administration begins. Asian affairs expert Gordon Chang is here with analysis. And Catholic NGOs are facing huge funding cuts by the administration. How effective and efficient are these groups in fulfilling their mission? President of the Lepanto Institute, Michael Hitchborn, is here with observations. Hungarian ambassador to the Holy See, Eduard Habsburg, talks about the latest from Rome and his new book. And we preview the opening Super Bowl song from Grammy winner Lauren Daigle. The World Over begins right now.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. What a show we have for you. If you'd like to comment, send me an X post. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. I'm also at Arroyo Grande on YouTube. The Trump administration is looking to cut government funding, and some Catholic aid groups are bracing for massive budget shortages. Joining me with some insights is the president of the Lepanto Institute, Michael Hitchborn. Michael, thanks for being here. For nearly 2 decades, you have been tracking how much money the U.S. government doles out to these Catholic organizations to carry out their intended missions. This week we hear that due to USAID spending cuts by the new Department of Government Efficiency, Catholic Relief Services is in the crosshairs. They are apparently laying off staff, cutting programs to prepare for up to a 50% cut to their grant this year alone. It's based in Baltimore, CRS is, and it's one of the, if not the top recipient of government funds from USAID. They have $1.5 billion in their annual budget. What do you make of the new administration's efforts here, and are they justified vis-a-vis Catholic Relief Services?
Well, I would start with the fact that Catholic Relief Services as an organization shouldn't be receiving federal funds anyway, simply because USAID was created primarily as a population control organization. In 1961, when it was created under the John F. Kennedy administration, and then later as it was developed under Richard Nixon, its primary purpose is population reduction. So every program that it institutes through USAID is predicated on the idea of reducing populations. So Catholic Relief Services never should have been receiving this money to begin with.
Michael, are the use of these funds dictated to CRS by the U.S. government, by USAID, or is the funding used at their discretion for their worldwide programs?
So whenever somebody applies for a grant, what they are applying for is to participate or to control a program already instituted by USAID. So it's not that USAID is giving them money in order to, drill wells or to put out malaria nets and that kind of thing. USAID is saying, we have a program that we want you to implement. And when you implement the program, here are some partners that you can work with, and these are the parameters that we have in mind.
So they're really an extension of the government. It's like a proxy or an avatar for the federal government, and they happily take the funds. So if these monies are pre-earmarked for certain programs, what is the end goal of the benefactor in giving to groups like Catholic Relief Services and Catholic Charities and Lutheran Family Services? I mean, these are massive grants. We're talking billions of dollars here.
Well, it's hard to determine what the end goal of individuals with regard to these agencies is. But I will tell you that USAID, in implementing these global structures, is creating a new form of global governance that's it's a supranational entity. So what they're trying to do is create these supply chains that go beyond governance, that go beyond governments, so that they can create an infrastructure that is globally reliant. And it's a huge problem. But when you start digging into it, and they look to the United Nations for guidelines on how to implement these things, you start to wonder, is this something that is in U.S. interests and in the actual interests of these foreign countries, or is it in the interest of the United Nations and a new form of global governance? And I think the answer is the latter.
One wonders what the overhead of these organizations is. I mean, the executive salaries, operating costs, with numbers ranging from about $200,000 to $500,000 per year. In Pope Benedict XVI's apostolic letter on the service of charity, he writes the following: in a particular way, the bishop is to see that the management of initiatives dependent on him offers a testimony of Christian simplicity of life. To this end, he will ensure that salaries and operational expenses, while respecting the demands of justice and a necessary level of professionalism, are in due proportion to analogous expenses of his diocesan curia. First of all, what does that mean? Translate that, Michael, and have these bureaucracies become too bloated?
Well, I think the simplest terms for the first part of that is nobody should be getting wealthy on the idea of helping the poor. That doing charity for a job, you know, it's one thing to have a job where you are helping people and it's, you know, you're helping people, but to get wealthy on that idea, I think is it's grotesque, and I think that that's exactly what Pope Benedict was aiming for.
Well, it was. Are these bureaucracies becoming too bloated? You know, and have they gotten out of control? And it's obvious they have. I mean, they've grown in so many ways, and now they're unaccountable to anybody, including the people who are funding them from the pews. Last week, we talked to Miami Archbishop Thomas Wensky about Vice President Vance's criticisms of the USCCB, which takes in millions of dollars in government aid for its migration and resettlement programs. Here's what he said.
The Vice President was a bit off the mark with alleging that we've gotten $100 million to resettle illegal aliens. First of all, we've gotten we participated since the end of World War II with the U.S. government in helping to resettle refugees, and refugees by definition are not illegal aliens. It's not government money that we're receiving; it's our money, because you know the government doesn't have any money. It's taxpayer money, and we're taxpayers as Catholics in this country.
Michael, your reaction, and in the years you've been tracking the dollars in federal grants going to Catholic NGOs like the USCCB and their refugee and migration services, what kind of numbers are you seeing, especially concerning the resettlement of immigrants?
Well, as I was going through the government grants going to the various Catholic charities entities throughout the country, I'm seeing hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in government grants going to these entities. And I'll just give you a few. The Catholic Charities of Fort Worth, for instance, in just last year received $128.7 million in government grants. And that accounted, by the way, for 92% of the overall revenue of Catholic Charities of Fort Worth, which makes it almost entirely a government entity. You know, and I'm finding 125 million, which is 72% for the Catholic Charities of Chicago, and I could go on, but these numbers are staggering, and it makes them a government entity, not a Catholic entity.
Well, and see, Michael, people don't understand this. They hear the bishops, you know, are resettling migrants. It's actually every diocesan office in addition to the bureaucracy in Washington. It's an enormous network, and therefore I realize I sympathize with you, because we've been trying to track down these dollars. It's hard to track them all down because you've got so many entities receiving government funds all the time.
Right. Well, it gets even more difficult because as you start to read the actual numbers and the grants that they were given the money for, it says things like refugee resettlement or assistance to migrants. But what does that mean? There's no itemized list. There's no actual accounting sheet that says how the money was used, what percentage was used to pay salaries, how many employees. There's nothing like that. So it's a very difficult system to untangle. It's like a giant Gordian knot.
Before I let you go, react, if you will, to what Archbishop Wensky said there about they don't resettle any illegal immigrants. These are all refugees, as denoted by the government. Is that true?
Well, when you have a Biden regime that had no interest in actually vetting anybody, and they were just basically allowing people to waltz across the border without any kind of guidelines, you have 10-year-olds walking across the border unaccompanied without anybody there. There are no papers. There's no way of figuring out who this person is. All they're holding is a little index card that says, here's my phone number of somebody to reach out to. There's no way to verify that that person is a relative. So are they actually resettling refugees? Are they actually resettling people that are documented? And I don't think the answer is yes.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, and this is, again, anecdotal, but I was doing a story down in at the Rio Grande. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the cartels brought people by the boatloads across. Border Patrol checked them in, essentially, put them on the bus. The next day, I was downtown in a Texas town. There's a huge Catholic Charities there. They brought the very same people because they were wearing the same clothes. I recognized them. They brought them into the line. They went into Catholic Charities. They came out with manila envelopes and airfare tickets. And I saw them that day at the airport on a flight to New York with me. So I'm certain none of those people, A, were vetted, and B, were refugees. These were the people I saw brought into the country the night before with really no papers and no one vouching for them. I'll give you the last word.
On top of that, I would like to address something that Archbishop Wenski said about this being our money, that, it's taxpayer money, we're all taxpayers, therefore it's our money. Well, it's my money too. And by the way, you're double dipping. You're collecting in the pews, but you're also collecting tax money, and there's no accountability. There's no way for us to vet this. There's no way for us to go through the accounting sheets and to make sure that the money is properly used. And you're simply asking us to trust you. And I don't think that that's fair.
Now, again, it's not unlike what you mentioned earlier. These are organizations that, well-intentioned perhaps initially, but have become kind of avatars for the government to do different functions that they're not accountable for. And that's a bad thing, particularly in the name of the church when nobody's watching the store. Michael Hitchborn, we'll leave it there. Thank you for the time. We'll check in again soon.
Thanks so much.
The Super Bowl kicks off this weekend in New Orleans, and Grammy winner and best-selling recording artist Lauren Daigle is kicking off the big game singing America the Beautiful. I sat down with her this week to talk about how this is a moment of vindication for her after being sidelined during COVID by the mayor of New Orleans, and she previewed her performance this week on the Arroyo Grande podcast. Take a look. Here you are, about to open on one of the biggest stages in the world at the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
When you got the call that you would be opening this Super Bowl in New Orleans, singing America the Beautiful, you thought what?
When I was in Australia on tour and I picked up the phone and there was a little bit of is this real? Is this actually going to happen? Is it real? I want to know that it's real before I get excited, And then it became, it was real. It was a real call. And I was tickled. I was like, this is crazy. And the thing that makes it so special too, I remember when we were doing the These Are the Days music video.
The videos, which are all shot in New Orleans. An explosive kind of Mardi Gras, hilarious, wonderful
I just wanted it to be exuberant.
Yeah.
Everything about that shoot was just so much fun. Hanson Snowbliz, they were the ones handing out the
snowball, crawfish, beads, trombone short. I mean, everybody and their dog is in this thing. I was waiting for Al Hurt and Pete Fountain to rise from the grave to come back and play backup for you.
That would be very spectacular. Yeah, wow. So afterwards, Troy, Trombone Shorty, he puts his arm around me and he says, you have a brother here. And we had worked together multiple times prior to that, but just knowing that he was basically accepting me into the fold. New Orleans is thick, okay? They are not messing around. They have their people have their place here. They have their cliques, they have their people. And so for him to do that and say, hey, I'm a brother here. I'm someone that is for you in this city. That meant the world to me. And then you see these moments where it is true. He told me, he said, I wanted to play America the Beautiful, and I was like, who can I get to sing this? And he said, you were the first person that came to mind, Those are the moments that I'm like, this became even more special because of the
You and
people who
Trombone Shorty playing it together.
Yes,
And
yes.
what do you want? First of all, what does that song mean to you?
Oh
America
my
the
gosh.
Beautiful.
Well, I remember so this is what I really did. When I got the phone call, I was like, holy cow. And what any dreamer artist does, I am a full-blown dreamer. I hang up the phone. I said, yes, mister, I will take the offer. Thank you so much, Mr. Boatman. Hang up the phone, and I go, oh, beautiful. And I immediately start practicing. I'm like, okay, let's see. How does it feel the most human in my voice? Where will it cut through to this generation? What the age that we are living in right now, the political climate that we're living in right now. How can I use this song to cut through to people who might be jaded toward our country or might not love what we have in this country or what we've built in this country? You know, how can I use this song? And the line, and I'm not trying to sound cliche at all because I know, hello, Christian, whatever, but when it says, God shed his grace on thee, that line, it just really gripped me to the core. In a way, I've sang songs all over talking about God, right? Yeah. But when you see a song that is meant for something else and it still includes the power of God in it, that to me it's meant to honor our nation and show the beauty of our nation, right? But they also know, wow, God has done something for this nation. There's something unique about this. And that, to be able to sing that song with a true conviction versus just, oh yeah, I'm just gonna jump up on stage and have this opportunity.
Well, you know, a woman, Catherine Lee Bates, wrote the lyrics, but the music was written by a choir master at a church, Samuel Ward.
Wow.
So when I heard you were singing, I thought, this is kind of this song coming home.
That's how it feels. And the arrangement is so honoring to New Orleans and Troy really, he and his crew came up with this arrangement. I was out of town, so I couldn't be in the studio. And he sent it to me and he said, you know, I wanted to give a hat tip to New Orleans because we're here, but I also know you're from Lafayette, so I wanted to give a hat tip to Lafayette. So he came up with this arrangement that rhythmically suits both places. That is so not only are the lyrics and the potency of it coming from that church background, right, that I feel like I will be able to sing with my heart and soul, but it also represents Louisiana, which is just, it's so pure. Like, it's authentic. That's the best thing.
Take me back to 2020. You are riding your bike here in New Orleans. And this is during COVID. Everything's locked down. You can't go outside. You can go outside, but you're not supposed to congregate. And there was a group of Christians praying. And you're just biking by. What happened?
So I was on my bike. I knew Sean Foyt, he had told me, I'm going to be in town, I'm singing at this event. And that, I found out prior that it was approved, like he got permits and everything, right? So it was approved by the government here.
But you're outside.
But I'm outside.
I mean,
and 2 weeks later, there was a convention, so I think it's all right. And so I was riding my bike, and I get a text from him, and he says, don't make me call you up on stage from the microphone. And so I was like, okay, I'll make my way up there, you know. And I walk up and he was like, where's your in-ears? I was like, in-ears? I wasn't planning on singing
I'm audience, baby.
Yeah,
I'm not
like,
performing.
what? And so I was like, my bike is right here. I'm just, you know, out to come and see.
Home.
Yeah, what's going on? And he was like, just jump on stage. And I said, okay, great. So I jumped on stage, and there were so many police, and they had barricades and all this stuff. So I was like, okay, so clearly this is okay. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Clearly this is okay. And honestly, though, it was such a moment to look out. This is the reality, regardless of what media and anybody wants to say, to look out and see so many people that were truly desperate, like actually desperate. People staying in their homes for so long. Finally, the city had started to open.
But they're praying in public.
Yeah, it wasn't like a negative.
Praying in public.
I know.
Which is a constitutional right, the last time I checked.
Yes, it is.
Public assembly and prayer.
Yes.
Praise of God is allowed
Yes.
under the Constitution, no matter what.
Yes.
The mayor came out and said of you in public that you placed residents in danger. And then she urged Dick Clark Productions. You were supposed to sing at the Rockin' New Year's Eve celebration from New Orleans. Now, that helps put everything in context because 2 weeks later, they were having a Rockin' New Year's Eve celebration in New Orleans. Meanwhile, she basically wanted to put you in timeout for daring to pray in public 2 weeks early.
Yes.
What did you think at that time? They bumped you off the roster. You weren't invited.
Yeah, I was definitely not invited. And I think from that letter, too, she quoted, she's a weapon to society. That was another bit of the vernacular. And I was like, wow, I didn't know I could be that powerful. No, I'm kidding.
You're a weapon, girl.
I was like, oh, wow. But, truth be told, the day, so when I saw that come out, I was shocked, to be honest. I was like, wait, you approved of all of this, What? This is kind of strange. And I went home to Lafayette and I got in my parents' bed and I pulled the covers over my head. As an adult, I was like, oh gosh, here we are again. Because there's no amount of public ridicule that is fun. Like, even if it helps your ratings, it's not fun. It isn't. But I learned a lot. I learned so much through that experience.
What did you learn?
What I learned is that when people need an element of hope, coming together is one of the most beautiful things. It is one of the most incredible rights that we have in this country. It is. And I think to take that away from people is so disheartening, especially in a time like that.
Do you feel vindicated? Do you think it's God's hand that all these years later,
Yes.
5 years later, you're on the biggest stage in New Orleans,
Yes.
representing the city, your state?
It was powerful to see all of the people that came around me during that time. I'll say, you were one of them, the Attorney General's office, the Lieutenant Governor's office. So many people came around and said, hey, this is wrong. What you are doing is wrong. And I just want to thank those people. I want to thank you. I want to thank the people that came in because that was one of the greatest lessons. Talk about being taught something was there's this verse in, I think it's in Exodus 14:14. It says, you need to be still, God will fight for you. And a lot of times I want to defend myself. I got that spicy Cajun side. So to get this moment years later, I would say for anybody watching that has had their reputation smeared in any sort of way, and they are just waiting for the moment of vindication, sometimes it only takes 5 years. That's not too long in the scheme of things.
No, that's a pretty short window.
That's a pretty short window.
You can watch the entire interview with Lauren Daigle and her stories of how pain and her faith revealed her mission and her life to her. It's really worth hearing. Subscribe at the Arroyo Grande with Raymond Arroyo YouTube page or wherever you get your podcasts. All the links are at raymondarroyo.com. President Trump offers a very unconventional solution this week to the conflict in Gaza. He announced that the U.S. would take over the Gaza Strip and redevelop it. With analysis, I'm joined by foreign policy analyst, co-host of the War and Freedom podcast, Dr. Walid Phares. Walid, thanks for being here. In a joint press conference with Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the president made this surprise proposal. He said that the U.S. would clean up the Palestinian territory, including the removal of unexploded bombs. Well, take a look.
As far as Gaza is concerned, we'll do what is necessary. If it's necessary, we'll do that. We're going to take over that piece, and we're going to develop it, create thousands and thousands of jobs, and it'll be something that the entire Middle East can be very proud of.
Walid, your thoughts on this? He also said Palestinian refugees could relocate to numerous sites or one large site, but shouldn't stay in Gaza. Is this a serious proposal or a pitch to get talks started?
Look, this is a snippet of what is, in fact, a much larger Donald Trump vision of the Middle East. I was privileged years ago to learn more about his vision. It's not just about Gaza, about many spots in the Middle East. To defeat the radicals and the terrorists in the region, you have to empower the civilian population. And when those populations were under the jihadists, you can't even get to them. So now he's concluding, look, completely destroyed because of Hamas attack on Israel. Israel retaliate, and this population is on the beaches. It's everywhere. I mean, He shouldn't be the one to do it. The Security Council of the United Nations should be the one. So I am kind of surprised that no Arab leaders so far understood what President Trump is talking about so far.
Well, the Saudis have already rejected the notion of the U.S. taking over Gaza. You know, they're saying they're committed to a Palestinian state. The foreign minister of Turkey, he's calling the idea absurd, and a relocation of Palestinians would require 2 million people moving. Given the tense and tenuous ceasefire between Hamas and Israel, what is Trump's endgame here, Walid?
Look, let's be honest with our public so they understand what's going on. He had a statement of 30 seconds, and his administration will have to come, to the public and explain what it is. Let me give you an example. There are 2 million Syrians in Lebanon fleeing, Bashar al-Assad and the massacres, etc., and waiting for the reconstruction of their homes and villages. So this is not something out of the absurd. This is normal. The Gaza Strip is very small. It's all completely destroyed. We can see it on video. What the president is talking about, but he needs to expand more for the public, is that we're going to rebuild this. We're going to make it into a fantastic place like Dubai, Singapore, or the Riviera, right? And then you can come back and claim it, but not the terrorists, just the regular people. That is something that would be a miracle if it happens. Probably it's too early to talk about it, but he had decided to do so, to tell the Palestinians, I am with you, I'm with your civil society, but we don't want the terrorists. I'm offering you a hope that other leaders are not offering.
I want to move on to Iran, something we've talked about for years, you've written about through most of your career. President Trump also said on Tuesday that if Iran carries out an assassination attempt on him, advisors will ensure that Iran is, quote, obliterated. We know that the Justice Department confirmed last November that there was a plot to assassinate President Trump during the election. Will Iran take this admonition from President Trump seriously, do you think? And how real is that threat now against the president?
Let's look at it historically and very quickly. There were multiple attempts to assassinate or kill or harm President Trump, even since 2017, after he led the Arab coalition, right, to contain the Islamic regime in Iran, and after he designated their major terrorist organization, the Pasdaran, as a terrorist organization. That's why they want his head. That's why they want his elimination. Plus, he's the leader who can make the change in Iran. So I'm not surprised that our agencies will eventually discover what was the role and what could be the role of that regime in the future against President Trump.
An executive order which Trump signed on Tuesday afternoon will reverse the Biden administration's lax sanctions enforcement, which brought Tehran more than $140 billion in profits, Walid. Under the Biden administration, Iran raked in billions from that illicit oil sale to primarily China, according to figures compiled by an advocacy group United Against Nuclear Iran. They claim China's proven the savior of Tehran by continuing to import millions of barrels a day. Your thoughts on this? Will this help? Can you lock down these sanctions and enforce these sanctions, and will they be effective?
Well, first of all, it's the minimum that the Trump administration is doing right now because of the hole that the previous administration, the Biden also slash Obama administration have done. They have relaxed everything on the regime. They had a deal with the regime. They must have been, and that's what Congress needs to investigate, some people who got a lot of commission from that huge transfer of money to the Iran regime, to the Islamic regime. Obviously, the Trump administration is reversing everything, including they reversed, as I need to remind ourselves, the decision by the Biden administration to remove the Houthis, the most lethal force that is actually suffocating our international trade in Yemen. He removed them from the terror list on day one. Day one, I remember. Trump reversed it back to them. So yes, what he's doing right now is absolutely vital to stop the expansion of the Khomeini regime. But he needs now, as he has done in 2019, to put together this coalition, which was called the Warsaw Coalition, against that regime, to isolate it. And let me add one thing, Raymond, to put pressure on, to give the Iranian people maximum support. The Iranian people will take care of their regime.
Walid, it's amazing to me that politics, ideology and politics, from administration to administration, threatens and imperils national security. I mean, if a group of people are engaged in terrorist attacks, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, you should acknowledge that and have the higher purpose of protecting the homeland at the forefront of your mind. The very idea that you're moving and pulling people out, in and out of terror watch lists based on politics is kind of gross to my eye, I have to say. It's ridiculous that it was pulled away by the Biden administration. The Taliban continued to use abandoned U.S. weapons in Afghanistan more than 3 years after the U.S. withdrawal from that country. A 2022 Defense Department report listed 78 aircraft, 40,000 military vehicles, more than 300,000 weapons were among what was left behind. Now the president has demanded that the Taliban return that hardware, valued, by the way, at $7 billion. They have refused. In fact, Taliban spokesman came out and told CBS, people don't make deals on the assets of their states. They make agreements through dialogue and engagement to find spaces and areas of common interest. Walid, the new leaders of Afghanistan, the Taliban leaders, say they want to reset with Trump after his re-election. What is the condition of the people of Afghanistan, and can Trump claw back this abandoned equipment?
Well, first of all, the Taliban are Taliban, they are jihadists, and jihadists have a plan. Jihadists have a strategy. They think they can, fool everybody like, two administrations have done under Obama and under Biden. What do you mean they're going to remit their weapons? These are jihadi weapons back to the United States unless they want better weapons. And I'm sure that this could have been done under the Biden administration. Of course not. They are using all the strategies, all the tactics to gain time. That's what all jihadists in the region are trying to do, from Syria to Hezbollah to the Tashid to the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard. They are all trying to pass as much time as they can so that they can revert back against us. And what is it that they're prioritizing right now? Crushing their people. The Taliban wants to do negotiations with the U.S. so they could crush women, minorities, children. Same goes with the Islamic regime in Iran. I mean, they're saying, oh, we're ready to speak with Trump. Yeah, but at the end of the day, they're not changing anything. They are, suppressing their population and arming. That's troubling.
Walid, I have 1 minute before we run out of time. This week at the International Religious Freedom Summit in D.C., Vice President J.D. Vance mentioned the plight of Iraqi Christians and their persecution over the years. The Vice President also gave credit to Trump for halting federal funds to non-governmental organizations that he asserted are dedicated to spreading atheism all over the globe. Watch.
Now, our administration believes we must stand for religious freedom, not just as a legal principle, as important as that is, but as a lived reality, both within our own borders and especially outside of them.
Walid, what's the current state of religious freedom, especially for Christians in Iraq? And will Trump's administration cutting off those funds, will that help their religious liberty?
Look, the situation is very bad. They are threatened by two forces. One are the Islamic Khomeiniist militias going after them, taking their land, taking their houses. And two, of course, by returning ISIS. We have not actually supported the Kurds to actually stop ISIS from coming back. I hope the president will be able to do it. But you mentioned one thing in our foreign policy that is troubling. We have funded wokeism, woke movements across the... It's not just the Islamists and the jihadists, but even the woke forces, not just in Iraq, everywhere. And that is actually harming all minorities. The woke people say here, oh, we are with minorities, but they are against them in the Middle East.
Walid Phares, thank you as always for your insight, and we'll check in again soon.
Thank you so much, Raymond.
President Trump's trade tariffs have signaled the start of his second administration. He's placed a tariff on imports from China, with the goal of forcing the communist nation to assist in halting illegal immigration and keeping fentanyl and other drugs from flowing across the United States borders. But will his strategy work? Joining me to discuss, attorney, author, and Asian affairs expert, Gordon Chang. Gordon, welcome back. I want to start with these tariffs. A day after the president tacked that 10% charge on Chinese goods coming into the United States, China retaliated with a 15% tariff on goods coming from the United States. So China's lodged a complaint now with the World Trade Organization, calling the Trump tariffs discriminatory and protectionist. Gordon, does China have a case? And doesn't China need trade with the U.S. more than the U.S. needs trade with China?
Well, certainly China needs us much more than the other way around. Last year, China ran up an enormous trade surplus against us, $295.4 billion in merchandise trade. That's up 5.8% from 2023. Trade surplus countries don't have very much ammunition in trade wars. And by the way, our economy is so much larger than China's, and big economies push smaller ones around. So Xi Jinping, yeah, he can put tariffs on, he can threaten to go to the World Trade Organization, but his retaliatory measures announced on Tuesday, as a friend of mine said, that's weak tea.
Well, Gordon, will the Trump strategy work here, though? I mean, how will these tariffs on U.S. allies like Canada and Mexico, how does that affect the trade war with China?
Well, that could push Canada, for instance, towards China. But also, you got to remember, China and Canada are actually closer than we are with Canada. And there's some very serious national security threats from Canada. Just to give you an example, although the number of migrants coming across our southern border has been very much in excess of the number of migrants coming across the northern border, those who have been apprehended on the terrorist watch list, there are more than twice of them coming from Canada than from Mexico in fiscal year 2024, which shows you that dangerous elements now prefer the northern route. And that's when the Canadian authorities are just allowing this to happen.
Crazy. This week, the U.S. Postal Service initially suspended all deliveries from Hong Kong and mainland China, but they've since resumed service, saying the USPS and Customs and Border Protection are working closely together to implement an efficient collection mechanism for the new Chinese tariffs to ensure the least disruption to package delivery. Gordon, your thoughts on this, and is this a small win for China?
It certainly is a small win, maybe even a big win for China, because it shows a number of things. It shows either the incompetence of the Trump administration, or it shows that they caved into China's pressure. So take your pick. But clearly the Trump administration did the right thing by eliminating the $800 de minimis exemption for goods from China. That was great. That was really important. But then to have this flip-flop, which was essentially on enforcement, that is really a sign of Trump failure. So, it's not a big deal in a sense, but I think that it really shows that the administration was not prepared to enforce the important measure that they had actually put in place.
Yeah, there's a lot of this back and forth. They say something, and then a few weeks later, they walk it back and say, oh, well, we're working with it, we're negotiating. For instance, the Chinese app TikTok, which was a concern for the United States and for the first Trump administration, I might add. Now, they'd like an American company to buy the app from China, but TikTok's parent company is holding out for negotiations. Last year, Gordon, Joe Biden signed a sell or ban law regarding TikTok. There was nearly a ban. Now we're waiting for some kind of deal to be struck. No matter who owns it, doesn't it still present a danger to U.S. security, given the potential for surveillance in that app?
Yes, well, if an American company owns TikTok, they will administer it. And so therefore, the surveillance aspect is mitigated or eliminated. But what is not eliminated is the curation algorithm, because China said it will not allow a transfer of that algorithm. That's the mechanism by which China disseminates propaganda in the United States. Also, all those videos on illicit drug use, self-harm, fomenting violence on American streets, we cannot allow China to have. And the idea that there would be some 50-50 joint venture with China is completely unacceptable. The Trump administration's actions on TikTok started a narrative that Trump was going soft on China. I don't know if that's true in general, but clearly this was something the Trump administration should not have done, because this was wrong from every perspective.
Yeah, I don't know why some new venture doesn't begin in the United States, call it Toctic, and launch an American version of this thing, and get everybody to jump off it and incentivize them some way. I mean, it's dancing videos for the most part, and cooking lessons and book recommendations. Surely we can do that on our own. We have platforms that can accommodate that. I mean, certainly the administration also has a connection with Rumble and Truth Social. Do something there. Anyway, do you think the Trump suggestion, I got to get into this, we talked about it earlier, that the U.S. occupy Gaza without troops, do you think that will embolden China's goal of reuniting Taiwan that we've been talking about for so long?
That will be the effect. Whatever one thinks about Gaza, the point is that this would be a distraction in resources and focus of America. And we cannot afford that. We've got critical problems, not only at home, but also in the Western Hemisphere. And of course, we have issues with regard to supporting our friends and allies around the world. Gaza is just, I think, a couple bridges too far. And so I think that this was first of all, is a really bad idea. But on the other hand, even if it were a great idea, this is not the right time for us to do something like this.
Yeah. China's also been exerting its influence and control in South and Central America, particularly around the Panama Canal shipping corridor. Now, this week, Secretary of State Marco Rubio visited Panama, and he called for the country to reduce China's influence in the canal zone and in all of Latin America. How much control does China really exert in that region, Gordon? And are Rubio and the president correct in their assessment here?
Yeah, China can choke off the canal anytime it wants to. It can block the waterway. And China is, I think, more influential in Panama than the United States is. There's a lot of history for that, but the point is that China has actually effectively taken over.
Why? Is it financial incentives? What are they doing there that's created that connectivity?
It was men and women in business attire kept coming over with big checkbooks and suitcases of cash and buying off the Panamanian elite. This was our fault. We were not paying attention to what was going on. So you take a look at those two port operations that Hutchison has. Hutchison is a Hong Kong company, but it is subject to the demands of the Communist Party. And in wartime, Hutchison has to do what the party wants it to. In other words, the Chinese military will take over those port facilities, one on the Atlantic side of the canal, the other on the Pacific side. And that's not the only Chinese levers in the canal zone. They can block that canal in so many different ways, Raymond. And so clearly, we have a right to be concerned about China's influence in the canal zone in particular, but also in Panama in general, because China's doing some things in Panama which are really bad. So for instance, China is now building a road through the Darien Gap. That will facilitate migration into the United States. This is really, really bad from our perspective.
And will these actions prove successful for the United States? I mean, are Rubio and Trump on the right track here, or is this too far gone?
Well, nothing's too far gone. I mean, but this will take a long time for us to reverse. And, it's really, people can argue about whether they like Trump's rhetoric about the Panama Canal. But the point is, someone had to raise the issue, and it was to Trump's great credit that he did so. It's also to Rubio's great credit that his first foreign trip abroad as Secretary of State was to Panama and to 4 other Central American and Caribbean countries, which means the Trump administration is prioritizing the Western Hemisphere over hotspots elsewhere around the world. I think that's a very good thing, Raymond, that we're now focusing on the threats to our homeland from areas nearby.
Yeah, no, they've smartly identified the Greenland thing, Panama Canal. If you can't protect your homeland, foreign adventures are of no use. I want to move on to the situation in North and South Korea. Northern Korean troops allied with Russia are in Ukraine now, and the political situation in South Korea is very unstable, with the prime minister now under impeachment. How is this affecting China's dominance in the region, Gordon, particularly with Russia North Korea, that alliance?
Yeah, first of all, I think that China was the mastermind behind this idea of sending North Korean troops to Ukraine. And that's a very long story, but China has inordinate influence over both Moscow and Pyongyang. And that arrangement could not have occurred, sending the troops to Eastern Europe, without China's say-so. The situation in South Korea is almost critical. And the reason is that China and North Korea are using their influence through the leftists in South Korea. The leftists there, they not only would want to establish a one-party state, they would also want to abolish South Korea. This has been their long-term goal. And now the leader of the leftist party, Lee Jae-myung, is a ruthless, I guess I shouldn't say the word, he's a ruthless figure. And we have to be very concerned that South Korea could become a communist state in a not too distant future.
Yeah. Gordon, we have talked a lot in the past about the security threat presented by our southern porous U.S. border. As you mentioned earlier, we've not talked so much about that northern border between the U.S. and Canada. That is often overlooked, but it's critical. And should we spend more time focused on that, do you think? Especially what you mentioned earlier, the number of terrorists crossing that border.
Yeah, this is important because terrorists and other dangerous elements realize that that border, as we say, is the longest undefended border in the world, and we have not been paying attention to it. Just to give you an example of how bad this is, in February, U.S. Border Patrol in Maine apprehended 3 Chinese nationals trying to sneak into the U.S. under cover of darkness. On the U.S. side was a 4th Chinese national, also a migrant, who was obviously there by prearrangement to help them get in. Now, if you're a desperate person and want to live in a free society, the first thing you do is you find a Border Patrol agent to give yourself up, to get into the asylum system, to get all sorts of goodies from New York City. If you're trying to sneak in, you're coming here for no good. And that is just an example of what is happening across our northern border right now, all the time. Yeah. The Chinese have very influential in Justin Trudeau's political system, and they've taken advantage of it to use it as a sanctuary to assault us.
Before we run out of time, birthright citizenship in the United States has become a major issue since Trump took office. He signed an executive order banning the practice of birthright citizenship. This week, a federal judge put a hold on that, the enforcement of that executive order. Has birthright citizenship been used by China, Gordon, and other enemies of the United States to weaken U.S. security? And should we be concerned?
Well, Chinese people have used it for sure. I don't know if the regime has used it, but what happens is when you have Chinese migrants in the U.S., China intimidates them, blackmails them, gets them to do all sorts of things, including committing crimes against America. So this is an issue which is really quite broad. There's the constitutional aspects of birthright citizenship, but that's one of the few tools that I think the party has not quite used quite yet. But as I said, Chinese migrants and Chinese nationals in our country, they are subject to a lot of coercion by Beijing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember years ago those birth hotels that were set up, and it was all Chinese nationals coming in and using a lot of those hotels. And there was some speculation that might have been run by the Chinese government. Who knows if those are still, in use, being practiced or not.
One thing we should say that China has run migrants into the U.S., operatives, military agents across our border. That is a real and present danger.
Wow. Gordon Chang, I always learn something when you're on the show. Thank you so much for being here. For all the latest, you can follow Gordon Chang on X at Gordon G. Chang. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Raymond.
Finally, I'm joined by the Hungarian ambassador to the Holy See. He's written a new book that focuses on building happy and healthy families. It's called Building a Wholesome Family in a Broken World. Please welcome back to the program Ambassador Eduard Habsburg. Edward, thank you for being here. In the book, you discuss the joys of the faith and how more traditional practices have helped your family grow spiritually. One of the ways you do that is you have a little prayer corner in your living room you write about. rosaries, retreats, pilgrimages are also part of your lives. You also mentioned that the Latin Mass has transformed you. What is it about the Latin Mass, the traditional Latin Mass, that you appreciate, and why do you believe it's good for families?
I learned a new trick as an old dog. I was a very active Catholic all my life, and I thought I couldn't learn a new trick. And I've done lots of things in my life. I was a charismatic, I was a normal Catholic, and then I encountered traditional Latin Mass, and I saw the effects it had on my children. My daughters and my son grew in their faith life, began to pray more regularly, and actually enjoyed being in church, even if it's longer and a bit more. Well, it's Latin, but so that was a good lesson learned.
On the topic of homeschool and schooling, you write in the book, in recent years, many schools have become ideological battlefields where serious indoctrination, according to the secular catechism, takes place. Current hot ideas and fads, particularly with respect to sexual exoticism and an atheistic worldview, are compulsory parts of school life and the curriculum. In addition, the ubiquitous presence of cell phones and social media inundates kids with toxic images and ideas. How should Catholics respond to that culture? And what are your educational recommendations, Edward?
Well, I think it's very important that you spend a lot of time with your children and talk about things. Before they get to school, they should know about all the important things in life, and they should have a very firm set of values. That's the first part. The second part is that I know that many families decide, faced with these realities, to do homeschooling. Now, this is not possible everywhere in the world. In Germany, you go to prison if you homeschool. In parts of the States, it's more normal. As my children were in normal schools, public schools, and also did some times of homeschooling, I can compare the two, and I can just say it can have a lot of advantages. Of course, like every system, it has disadvantages. You have to work on things, but it can help you to pass on your own values if your school in your surrounding is not able to pass them on to you.
Yeah, well, you mentioned it earlier, you know, that closeness to kids, talking to them, spending time with them. And a homeschool environment does allow you that proximity to the kids, that closeness all day long. In the chapter on courtship and finding the right spouse, you have great advice. You say that preparation for marriage has to begin years before you actually date the girl or guy of your dreams. What practical advice would you give? And how was your family over the centuries shaped by our faith and practice of chastity in preparation for marriage?
My advice is really not just to tumble into the dating and courtship life as most people do, because most people tumble into one relationship after the other, beginning in school, because it's just the way it is done. But it's your own decision how to do this. And I believe with every such relationship started and broken off, your chance for a lifelong happy marriage will get smaller and smaller until you've used up all of your energy and all of your strength. And so what I'm trying to say is talk to your children early in an age-appropriate way. Make them understand that what you really want is a lifelong, happy, fulfilling marriage. And in order to go that way, your life and hopefully your spouse's life should be shaped by faith and by the same ideas about family. And this is something the Habsburgs did really well. I know that many people on Twitter like to joke about Habsburg inbreeding and other things. I have jokes of that kind every week on my timeline. But in reality, the Habsburgs married their children off to families where they were sure that they shared the same faith, the same values, the same ideas about family. And this is something that every family today can strive for.
Yeah, it's not a bad way to go. That's why the line has continued and the name has continued all these centuries. Look, before we go, I want to get your reaction to some Vatican and cultural news. German Bishop Ludger Schreppers of Essen was criticizing President Trump for accepting the natural order of the sexes On January 28th, he told a publication that Trump removes the protection against discrimination for queer people and no longer recognizes gender minorities, end quote. And he added, every attack on the rights of queer people threatens the rights of all people who do not conform to the narrow ideas of how one should look or behave. Ambassador, your take on that and how far we seem to have strayed in some parts of the church when you have a Catholic bishop basically contradicting not only common sense but Catholic teaching when it comes to biology.
My reaction to that as a Catholic is I open the Bible and I see what Jesus says, and Jesus quotes that God created them as man and woman. It's very, very easy. There are two sexes, full stop. This is what God himself says in the Bible, what our church teaches. And as ambassador of Hungary, of course, my government is very engaged in trying to keep gender ideology out of our schools. So, yes. You have my position in a nutshell.
You recently tweeted about our Vice President J.D. Vance's comments on Ordo Amoris. In an interview, he referenced rightly ordered love. And you tweeted the following. Who would have predicted 70% of my timeline heatedly discussing a Christian concept coined by Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, all because of an American vice president? What is Ordo Amoris? This comes obviously from Augustine's City of God, and was commented upon by Thomas Aquinas, as you mentioned. What are your thoughts on this? And how surprised were you to see politics raising this issue?
Well, I wasn't very surprised because I'm aware that J.D. Vance is a Catholic and a freshly converted one. So Ordo Amoris, I didn't know the expression, but as a family man, you know the basic rule. And it's like your first love goes to your family and your surrounding. Your first responsibility is your spouse and your children. After that, the people around you in your work, the people in your hometown. And after that, you can embrace the entire world. But there is a natural order, like there is a natural order in many things. There is an order in love too. So it didn't really shock me. And I was rather surprised how furious many people got on I have to say, on X. All my timeline was full of people. But I thought, what a great time we're living in if an American vice president gets a whole Twitter timeline to debate Thomas Aquinas and Augustine. And I strongly advocate for political leaders who have clear theological or philosophical positions so we know what they will do next.
Yeah, no, he clearly opened up a fascinating vein of discussion. But when you see that kind of reaction, you know he's on to something. And to me, it speaks back to the church's social teaching of subsidiarity. You're responsible for the circle of your family and then your community and then your nation and on and on. But the local is always where your responsibility lies and where you have to start any of these conversations. So I love that he brought that up. Edward, I wish we had more time. Building a Wholesome Family in a Broken World by Ambassador Eduard Habsburg is available at bookstores now, at EWTN's Religious Catalog as well. Ambassador, thank you for the time.
Thank you very much, Raymond.
That is all the time we have for now. Be sure to catch us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Bye now.